Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the PhinManiacs.com podcast. I'm your host, Louis Sung, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Chad Ronnebaum. And a little bit of an embarrassing note I feel like I have to mention, folks. You all were wondering, well, why wasn't there a show last time? Well, the very sad reason is that, we did have a show last time. Last week we had it already. It was set to go. And then after I listened to it in post-production, I had come to the realization that with several cutouts of my microphone and several equipment failures on my part, the show basically had to be scrapped, which is really a shame because we had a lot of fun talking about Adam Gase, and Chad was on fire. It was an amazing time, and I feel sorry that you all can't hear it. But we're going to hear now, and we're going to try to make up for it now. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. We got Reshad Jones news that is coming out. Apparently the Dolphins are looking to trade him before the season starts, which a lot of people had already actually called it, but I guess we never believed it because, some people said the contract is untradeable, which when you look at it, it's really not, and we'll probably discuss that a little bit later. But let's see. And, of course, we're going to try and see if we can recap OTAs a little bit. We had actually done that in the last show, too, but since we missed it, I guess we can just kind of repeat everything we said last time. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. Of course, we just mentioned it. Reshad Jones is apparently on the market. The Dolphins are making it clear that he is on the trade block and best offer come now. So, Chad, I'm going to just go ahead and let you talk. What do you think about the news that Reshad might be traded, that they're looking to trade him, and what do you expect to come out of all that?
I don't find it shocking that they're looking to trade him. And the reason is, if anybody's not following it, is we've passed June 1st now. And so that means the contract officially became tradable as of a couple days ago. Had they tried to trade Reshad prior to June 1st, it would have been a whole different salary cap situation. But now that we've passed June 1st, it kind of spreads out over 2 different years now on his contract in terms of the cap hit from the money they've already paid him for his contract. His contract is still substantial. I want to say if you were traded for him, you'd be paying him, was it $13 billion? I'm trying to remember what his cap hit would be in the trade, but
please stand by while I pull up overthecap.com.
There you go.
Let's see, trading post June 1st, Reshad Jones would cost $4 million in dead money and $13 million in cap savings. That's an estimate, by the way. There are some hundred thousands in there, but
okay.
It's
but no,
small.
So that $13 million is what he's on his contract to be paid to play the season, though. So it's his non-paid amount. And so if you were to trade him with his current contract, so right now for Reshad Jones to be traded, he'd have to agree to restructure his contract, or the team you trade him to would have to agree to take on his current contract. And so for a team right now to trade for Reshad Jones means they would have to pay him $13 million to make it to take him over onto their team and take his contract over. And Miami then would have only $4 million of dead space, which is why they're willing to trade him now, because that's more something they can handle. So it'll come down to how many teams out there are interested today, and what would they really give up for that. You're probably not going to get much at all, if even an offer, I would say, at that cap hit right now for Reshad Jones, because I believe he's been rehabbing. He had a shoulder injury all last year he was dealing with, and I think he's been rehabbing that. And so I don't know where he's at in his rehab. So any trade would be definitely contingent on a team really checking him out in a physical to see where he's at physically. Assuming he's healthy and ready to play, I would think that the only way we would see a trade happen would be not too different from like the Robert Quinn or the Tannehill type trade. I think where we take on some of that cap and in exchange for a pick. So you're probably going to look at a situation where maybe Miami absorbs $5 or $6 million of that $13 million in some fashion, and you get Reshad Jones traded over to a team maybe for more like $7 or $8 million. Then I think you might get some teams suddenly interested a little bit that might send you a mid-round pick, maybe a 4th or 5th round pick for a Pro Bowl level safety for a team that's really trying to win aggressively right now. But I don't know if there's any teams. I haven't done any research in the league to see if there's any teams right now that still really need a safety. You're kind of at a time of year where free agency is over, the draft is over. So I would think most teams right now have their safety position pretty well in hand. And so I don't think Reshad Jones will probably get moved anytime soon until after training camp opens, because then you have the potential that a team could lose one of their starting safeties, and in training camp, and so they really then will be needing a safety, and then we will have a Pro Bowl level safety that you can trade over to them. In terms of my own thoughts, I think it makes sense. Reshad Jones I want to say he's 31 years old, so he's going to be, and probably into the last 2-3 years on the normal NFL players, where he's going to be top level type safety. That's probably all he's got left, where he's going to be considered one of the top safeties in the league. I think there was more issues behind the scenes than we were probably aware of last year. We know that he set out a game where he wasn't happy because he got pulled out of the lineup, and he didn't show up obviously for the non-mandatory camps this year. I think he was the only player that didn't show up, and so I just think the writing's on the wall that he wants to move on, and Miami's, I think, wants to have him move on because he's probably not part of what they're trying to do here in Miami, to be honest. I think he's still a very good athlete, and he's definitely capable of still being a top safety, but I just don't think he's in Miami's plans right now. And again, understanding the difference between tanking and versus not putting your priority on winning. I don't think Miami's attempting to tank, but if your priority isn't on winning games in 2019 and your priority is try to develop to have the best team possible in 2020 and 21, it makes more sense to get a draft pick for Reshad Jones, or it even makes more sense to be playing a younger player now, like maybe a Murray Smith, even Bobby McCain, in the safety roles this year to try to help develop those players, because they're going to be part of the team in the next 2 to 3 years right now, and Reshad Jones just simply isn't. He's either going to get traded or cut. If they don't trade him this year, they'll probably keep him on the roster because they don't save that much cap space, but they won't. I don't see them keeping him on the roster next year or years beyond. They'll cut him at that point when they don't have to absorb that big of a cap hit.
Pretty much on board with you. As far as teams who could be interested, I did a little bit of research just now while you were talking, and apparently the Dallas Cowboys have been fielding calls from teams who are offering a safety. So I guess the idea is that the Cowboys are in need of a safety. I believe that right now they signed like veteran George Aloka. I don't know if that's how you say his name or not. And also they where is it? They selected Texas A&M Donovan Wilson at safety. So, but that's pick number 213 from this year. So it's not like he's a very high priority. So the Cowboys could be in need of a strong safety. And I just want to say this because my understanding of how safeties work is that free safety is more of a roamer, and they're the guys who play center field, while strong safeties are the guys who like to play in the box and they like to trash incoming running backs and stuff like that. So with that in mind, that is why we have this argument about whether the Dolphins have too many strong safeties with TJ McDonald and Reshad Jones, and of course Minkah Fitzpatrick can also play in that role as well. So right now what the situation is that Reshad Jones is yet another strong safety, despite being listed as a free safety. I think he's listed as a free safety because somebody has to be, and you can't just keep saying that everybody's a strong safety because then the team looks like they have none. But anyway, the point is, the Cowboys could be fielding calls, and if we pull that kind of same situation where the Dolphins did their thing with Robert Quinn, they basically said, listen, we will pay some of that salary if you decide to take him on, and that's the same thing they did with the Ryan Tannehill as well. And I find that, again, that's a very ingenious move on the part of the Dolphins, basically saying, give us a better draft pick and we'll pay some of your salary. That is, I think, the best thing that they can do with the Reshad Jones thing. And this is the other factor besides with Robert Quinn. With Robert Quinn, it was painfully obvious that Robert Quinn had lost a step, that he was not the same guy he used to be. Reshad Jones, I get the injury factor, I really do, but it's like Reshad Jones was never like too slow or showing signs of age or anything like that. He played through that shoulder injury and he played very well. So with that in mind, he's still a very viable safety in the NFL. He's still somebody who can produce very well. He's not somebody, well, maybe he will, maybe he won't. We're just going to take a chance on him. So if the Dolphins are willing to pay some of that salary to the Cowboys or whoever, I can't imagine that they would get less than a third rounder, because what did we get to what did they trade Robert Quinn for? A fourth rounder, I think it was? So,
yeah, I believe that's right.
Right. So if Robert Quinn, who is a pass rusher, and I get it, pass rusher is an elite position in this league, but even still, if you can get a fourth rounder for Robert Quinn, you should be able to get more for somebody who we know is a better player, whether you're wondering if he's healthy or not. Reshad Jones has never shown that he can't play. He has always been a stud player, whether he's injured or not. So if you can get a fourth for Robert Quinn, you should be able to get more for Reshad Jones if you are willing to do that same trick where you basically pay some of his salary.
Oh, yeah, I think that'll depend on where that falls in at, because obviously the more salary the Dolphins are willing to pay and give up cap space, the more appealing, Reshad Jones. I mean, if you suddenly say we'll pay $8 or $9 million of his salary, now you're talking to a team that you're offering them a Pro Bowl level safety for like $4 or $5 million a year. That becomes extremely appealing to a team that really needs one and is trying to win right now. Because I agree with you, Lewis. He didn't have a shoulder injury that was career threatening, to my understanding, and he hasn't had any issues like with knees or anything lately, or that I don't know if he's ever had any major knee injuries. So I think there's no reason to think he wouldn't physically be in really good shape and still able to perform at a very high level. I definitely think that's in play, and he's a very tradable safety right now, because you probably don't, at this point in the year, this is what's different about the Dolphins right now for 2019. Is, like I said, they're not trying to lose, but they're not placing an emphasis on trying to win. Whereas probably every other team in the league right now is trying to win, because that's the nature of this league. If you're a GM or you're a coach, if you aren't winning, you're not employed very long in the NFL. And so for every team, when you suddenly have a 31-year-old Pro Bowl safety that's got nothing physically wrong with him, there's an immediate solution if you have a hole at safety. And in terms of the terminology, I think Reshad Jones, he's more of a strong safety than a free safety. Historically, he's been able to do both, because he's a very talented football player.
Oh yeah, he's definitely talented. He's just better at one thing than the other.
But yeah, and I don't think, especially with Flores, I don't think there's even going to be such a thing anymore as a strong safety and a free safety, because he's just moving pieces around so much. And so I think Flores wants safeties that can do both. And honestly, in today's NFL, the traditional strong safety is kind of becoming more and more of a thing. You don't see it near as much anymore. It used to be back in 10, 15 years ago, you had the Steve Atwaters, and Miami had Louis Oliver, and those were these big safeties that are 220 that could really hit hard, and they were used a lot to come down into the box and help support the run. You don't see that near as much these days, because these teams so many offenses are going 3 and 4 wide receivers so frequent that it's just a much more imperative skill that your safeties are able to man up on people and cover tight ends and cover receivers. And honestly, I don't think that's Reshad Jones' strong suit these days. It's not even comparable how much better of a coverage defensive back Minkah Fitzpatrick is compared to Reshad Jones. Minkah Fitzpatrick literally can cover as well as a cornerback, and he can play safety. So it's really hard to get guys that are able to do both, and we're very fortunate that we have Minkah. And coming out of the OTAs, they were playing Bobby McCain some at safety, and again with Flores, you're not sure who's doing what on his defenses, which is part of the way they confuse offenses. And so when you have Bobby McCain and Minkah Fitzpatrick both on the field, you're not going to be entirely sure who's actually playing safety in terms of a responsibility in the defense and who's actually playing the slot corner, because Minkah can do both. And if they're teaching Bobby McCain maybe how to play some free safety role in that defense, it's not because they're planning on playing Bobby McCain all the time as a safety. It's because they're planning on, when you come up to the line as a quarterback, you don't know who's actually doing what in the defense, because you have guys that can do both. And so I just don't think Reshad is a critical piece anymore of what Flores wants to do. And if Flores really wants to bring in a big safety into the box, he's got TJ McDonald, who's he's huge. He's the perfect strong safety if you want to play a guy that's big up near the line. And I still think that you're going to see TJ McDonald sometimes come into the game, and the defense isn't going to be entirely sure if he's coming in to fill the role of a linebacker or if he's actually playing safety. And that's, again, the beauty of what Flores likes to do is it's very confusing for an offense to try to understand what the defense is doing. And I think it makes all the sense in the world to get Reshad Jones traded off, especially if you have a team that wants to play a more traditional safety. Reshad Jones is very, very capable. He's a very good run defender. He's still pretty got speed. So, yeah, I honestly think they'll get a deal done. It's just going to come down to what teams are willing to give up and what Miami's willing to give up. So I personally would give up $4 to $5 million of our cap space for a mid-round pick. I think that's probably what the going rate's going to be. What they're looking for is they're going to probably look at trying to have Reshad Jones get paid $8 to $9 million by the team that acquires him, absorb $4 to $5 million, and then try to get maybe a 4th or 5th round pick out of it.
And so is that your overall goal, or is that still like an unfair deal? You're probably trying to be realistic, but let's say as just you as an armchair GM, what would it take for them to feel like that they got fleeced?
For another team to feel like they got fleeced, you mean? Or for the Dolphins?
For the Dolphins. Like, they trade Reshad and they get something back. At what point do you feel like the compensation wasn't worth it?
I think if you give up very much cap space and get anything below a 5th, I don't know. Just because anything below a 5th round pick, just typically the chances of them making the team are usually pretty slim. And the differential between a 6th and 7th round pick and an undrafted free agent usually isn't that significant. So I wouldn't want to give up the cap space at that point. So for me, if you're getting above a 5th, anywhere above a 5th round pick, I feel like if you're $4 or $5 million, I don't think you're getting fleeced at all for the Dolphins, because the Dolphins have pretty much cleaned off their payroll, so they can absorb some of these cap hits right now without too much difficulty. So I guess that's where I'd be at. I would say if Miami, does something like give up $7 or $8 million of cap space to get him traded and takes like a 6th or 7th, then I would have rather just have cut him and kept the cap space if you start getting into those scenarios.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that the 5th round pick is my final offer as far as like getting compensation back. Like anything lower than that, and it's just garbage at that point. At that point, I just keep Reshad and not even bother with it.
Well, to clarify, that's if we're giving up cap space. If some team wants to just take him on contract fully on and pay him $13 million this year and do that route, I'd probably look at a 6th or 7th in that case.
Well. Okay, yeah, I can see that, but at this point, the way I look at it is that I would much rather let them have the cap space than us keep the cap space and lose a lower pick. Because remember, this is what I'm thinking of, is that I'm not so much looking for cap space. Cap space can be worked around any which way you want. Cap space can be maneuvered, it can be manipulated, it can be screwed around with like for days on end, and you can find ways around it if you really try hard enough.
Right.
But one thing you can't get back is decent draft picks. Right now, the Dolphins have a whole bunch. Like, they have a buttload of draft picks, double digits worth. At least that's what the ideal will be after they get their compensation picks, which I know that Tom Shannon, one of our writers, has been like egging us on in our chats about how we assume that they're going to get a 3rd rounder. We assume they're going to get a 5th rounder because we don't know that for sure. I'm going to go ahead and say fine, whatever. But until I hear otherwise, I'm going to believe that it's a 3rd rounder for Jawan James and a 5th rounder for Cam Wake. So we're going to have a lot of draft picks, including those comp picks, come 2020. So if what we're doing is we're building up draft capital, which is why we're making all these trades to begin with, which is the whole reason we want to get rid of all these vets. It's not just because we want to get rid of the vets and we're cutting dead fat off. That's fine. We get that. But we want something for it. We're not willing to give up cap space just because. If we really wanted to do that, we would have just cut Robert Quinn. We would have just cut so-and-so. We wouldn't have bothered to make the trade to begin with. We traded Ryan Tannehill. If all we were worried about was cap space, we would have just cut ties with him to begin with. But no, what we did was we traded him. We basically said, here's some of our cap space, give us a draft pick. That's what they're aiming for. So I would rather let them rent that $5 million in cap space and give us a better pick than for them to say, okay, we'll take Reshad Jones and his whole contract, but you only get like a seventh. That's, to me, I'd rather take the pick.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, Lewis. That's the preference I think the Dolphins have too. Because I think some people don't like you saying the Dolphins are doing the Patriot thing right now, but I don't think Miami is going to be chasing free agents in 2020 or 2021 either, where they're going to want a ton of cap space. And you have to factor in there's a little bit of an uncertainty because they're starting to circle around to negotiating the collective bargaining agreement, and nobody even knows 100% sure what the salary cap structure and the way that's going to operate in a few years down the road is going to be either. So I don't think Miami is overly concerned with cap availability right now to go chase a bunch of free agents. I don't think Miami is going to use their cap space on much more than maybe trying to sign maybe Laremy Tunsil next year to a longer term deal. But I don't think you're going to see Miami go out and try to land a massive contract and try to get some of the top free agents. I think that those days are gone right now with Greer and Flores. So they would much rather get the young draft picks to try to bring them in and develop them into their own system. So I absolutely agree with you that that's what they're going to do. And I'd be really surprised if that's what Miami is angling towards doing, is trying to get a mid-round pick to the point where I think they'll just sit with Reshad Jones. Greer has definitely proven that he's patient and he'll wait until they get the deal they want to, kind of how the Rosen thing worked out. So I think you'll very possibly see Miami just have Reshad come in. They'll just keep working him in to the system, and they'll say, fine, if we can't get the deal we want, we'll play him. And they may go all the way up to the trade deadline. I think that's around October. You may not see Reshad Jones get traded until halfway through the season even, but he absolutely, in my opinion, is not in this team's plans for 2020 and beyond. So they will move him at some point if they get the offer they're looking for.
It's going to be a sad day when Reshad goes, but let me tell you something. It definitely wasn't without its ups and downs. Let's talk about this real quick. Again, this is basically coming from Tom, who writes for us, and he has been adamant that Reshad Jones is not that great as far as it's not about his play. It's about everything else. He apparently, the way it's looked at is that lost all respect for Reshad when he quit in that one game, or he was benched. Either one. We still don't know the full story, but either way. That was something that we had to consider, and then the idea that he didn't attend voluntary OTAs, he didn't show up for that, and that he was apparently disgruntled and whatever, and there was rumors swirling all over the place. How much, Chad? How much do you factor in all that other stuff when we're talking about whether he goes or not? Do you feel like that they would have made it public that they were willing to trade him if he had been like the consummate teammate from beginning to end?
Oh no, I think that would change it. I think that's why I'm saying I don't foresee him being in the team's plans at all, because the NFL it's about winning, and if you don't believe that, you're not paying attention. And so teams want to win, and so Miami actually, in my opinion, put up with quite a bit with Reshad Jones, because I think a lot of people forget the team had to deal with issues with him back to the Joe Philbin days because he got suspended for using performance enhancing drugs, and that hurt the team that year. And despite all that, the team gave him a nice contract, and then he started making waves that he wanted to be paid even more because he was being viewed as maybe one of the top safeties in the league. And so Miami actually did that when they didn't have to. They restructured his contract and made him one of the highest paid safeties in the league. So for him then to, after getting that sort of a deal, to quit on a game and then not show up for voluntary tells me you're paying a guy to be one of the top at his position, and he's just not being a leader for the team. And that quitting is not being a leader. Not showing up to voluntary camp is not being a leader. That's just saying, I'm only worried about myself. And so for anybody that wants Reshad Jones now, you just have to understand that's what you're getting. And the Jets are dealing with the same thing. They just gave Le'Veon Bell that big contract, and he didn't show up for voluntary camp. Now, it's voluntary. I keep hearing that. But the question I have is, who's the leaders of your team? And so that's what you have to understand you're getting a guy who's worried first and foremost about himself. He's not worried about trying to improve your team or how many games you're going to win. He's worried about his own health, his own responsibility, and what he's being paid. And that's what Reshad Jones is right now for a team. That's what he'll be for the rest of his career.
I don't know. I don't know, man. Because like you said something is that he said that he's worried about his own health. Okay, if that's true, then why play with a torn shoulder all year long? If he's really worried about his health, he would have said, "Hey, put me on IR. I can't play."
Well, because he didn't have an injury, so it was whether he wanted to play through pain or not. So absolutely, Reshad Jones.
His shoulder was torn. It wasn't just like, oh, it's a little bruise. No, he had to wear like the brace and everything.
No, absolutely, he did. He played through a painful injury, not an injury that would get worse with playing, but he played through a painful injury. Now, I don't know if he did that for incentives in his contract or if he was just being a team player. You could say both of those. But I'm just basically pointing out he did quit on the team. He didn't show up for voluntary camp. So that would tell me he's not putting the team first right now. He's putting himself first, which a lot of players do that. I was just kind of pointing that out that so if you want to acquire Reshad Jones, you're going to get a guy who's basically going to come in. He can play safety at a high level, but he's not going to come in and be a leader of your team to try to help develop the younger players and try to set a precedent on being a leader for the team, coming in and doing everything he can do to learn your defense. I mean, honestly, if Reshad Jones was worried about trying to be a really good safety right now for the Dolphins, you would think he would show up at voluntary camp so he could start learning the system, because there's no way Reshad Jones knows Flores' defensive schemes and systems. And those are being installed right now in those OTAs. They're starting to teach that stuff. And so that he's basically setting the priority that I'm not going to come and worry about trying to learn your schemes right now. I'm going to worry about myself. And so that's what you're getting. And there are players like that in the NFL that they're not going to put your program trying to be successful above themselves. If that makes sense.
No, it does. I get you. Well, either way, we're going to find out whether Reshad gets moved or not. I would really be interested in hearing what rumors come out as far as what the Dolphins will be getting in compensation. I would love to see them get another fourth-round pick even if it meant that we're going to give up some of our cap space. It's not like the Dolphins don't have it to spare. According to what I see on Over the Cap, it's like over $23 million in cap space. So we definitely have the money to spend. It's not like we don't have it. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting because with what's come out, they're obviously trying to move him right now. And so I can't imagine Miami wants to go a long ways with trying to move him. So either Miami feels like they might have some suitors if they're putting that out there right now, or I don't know. I guess I really don't know. I'm trying to. Obviously, after June 1st, he became much more tradable from a cap situation. But the fact that Miami's pretty well, I mean, unless the reporters are making stuff up, it seems pretty clear Miami just put the ad in the classifieds that Reshad Jones is up for trade. And so I would say once you do that, you're typically just assuming that you're not going to get the best out of that player, because Reshad Jones has to be obviously right now well aware the team's trying to trade him. And so with him knowing that, that means when he's coming into training camp and the preseason and stuff like that, it's in his best interest to not get injured, because he knows he's trying to get shipped off anyway. And so the team isn't going to be giving Reshad Jones any more money. The team's just looking to get rid of him and get compensation back for him. So to me, when you're in that situation, it's probably not going to be a great dynamic to have Reshad Jones around in training camp, because what do you do with him? Because you want to move him. He's talented. And so you get into that catch-22 where you might have a player that's younger behind him that's not as good of a safety as Reshad Jones is, but you want to develop that younger player because he's going to be with the team in the coming years, and you're hoping he might be anyway, and Reshad Jones won't. And so who do you give reps to? Who do you play when and where? And so you're almost better off to get Reshad Jones moved on and off to a different team, get your draft pick for next year, and then work with what you have versus trying to figure out who to give reps to and who not to.
All right, I hear you. Well, maybe we'll get to see Maurice Smith finally. The poor kid, he's been blocked this whole time.
It's Miami's just they've had a lot of safeties, and that's made it hard for him to find a spot in the defense. So we'll see.
All right, so before we move on to our little talk about summarizing OTAs, which probably will be some of what we talked about last time we did a show, which got scrapped again, but anyway. Some quick news that is just breaking now as we're recording this. So, Chad, I remember you said in the last show that the whole Ndamukong Suh and Gerald McCoy discussion, I believe you mentioned that it would be pretty crazy if the Buccaneers ended up paying more for Suh than for McCoy, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I wish they didn't, but yeah, I did say that.
Okay, so Ndamukong Suh signed a 1-year contract with the Bucs for $9.25 million.
Mm-hmm.
We just got news that Gerald McCoy has chosen his new team. It is the Carolina Panthers, and guess what they're paying him?
The same amount.
1-year deal, $8.5 million.
Okay.
So
he was cheaper anyway as of today than Suh.
Yep.
Okay.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Apparently, Gerald McCoy is worth less than Ndamukong Suh in the eyes of the NFL, and apparently the Bucs.
Well, the Bucs. If you're looking at it from purely cost standpoint, the Bucs saved about $3 or $4 million, right?
Yeah, well.
Because they would have had to pay McCoy his contract unless he would have renegotiated it, which I'm assuming he said no at some point.
Nobody wants to take a pay cut, no.
Well, he said no, and whether I don't know what those, if that was done, I don't know, or what those terms were, I don't know. But Gerald McCoy found out what his market value is, and it was pretty obvious what Gerald McCoy was doing was going around and seeing who was giving him the best offer. So he made the rounds.
Yeah, he said there's reports that he wanted to stay in the South. That's why he liked Baltimore or Cleveland or Carolina better.
Sure. Which that's fine. I still think he's a productive football player. Both of those guys are now into their 30s, and so I think you're in that guessing game that Miami historically has got themselves in the past. Is when you get Gerald McCoy in his early 30s and Ndamukong Suh in his early 30s, how dominant are those players going to be? You got to be careful and not compare that to what they were in their mid-20s when they were Pro Bowl dominant defensive tackles. This is not too different than what we went through with several of the players that we've gotten into their 30s. You don't get quite the same player. So I don't know. But to me, the interesting thing will be with him selecting the Carolina Panthers, that means Gerald McCoy is going to be playing Tampa Bay twice this year within the division.
Yep.
So I have to assume that's not what Tampa was wanting. They were probably hoping he was going to go to Cleveland or Baltimore or something like that, because I would imagine he'll be highly motivated in those games to do it. So it'll be a comparison the rest of this year is how does Gerald McCoy compare to Ndamukong Suh, and that'll be something that the management of the Buccaneers are going to be judged on that move. Because one thing that is being passed aside is Gerald McCoy was a very popular player in the Tampa Bay community, and I think he did a lot like charity type stuff in the Tampa Bay area, and so they got rid of a guy that I think was an important foundational player for their team and their community, and replaced him with Ndamukong Suh. And Ndamukong Suh has been a really, really good football player, but that's not what Ndamukong Suh is. He's not a big time, spend a lot of time in the community and with the team, and he's kind of his own guy. And again, when we were just talking about with Reshad Jones, it's not that Reshad Jones is not a good football player. It's not that Ndamukong Suh is not a good football player, but they're focused on who's paying me the most and what's best for me. That's what they're doing. So the Tampa Bay kind of swapped a guy that was do a lot for the team and the community and replaced him with Suh, who's going to be just focused on himself as a D tackle for them. So it'll be fun to see how that plays out because they'll be compared. Just like with us, Josh Rosen's going to be compared now to Kyler Murray for the rest of his career with that move that the Cardinals made. And they'll be judged on how that plays out, the GM will. Whether they like that or not, the Cardinals GM is going to be judged on who does better, Josh Rosen or Kyler Murray, and that trade will define his career in many respects. Not that McCoy Suh is near that big of a scale, but like I said, NFL is not for long. That's what it stands for. So for the GM for the Bucs, they got to really be hoping that Ndamukong Suh outperforms Gerald McCoy, because if Tampa Bay ends up losing 2 games that Gerald McCoy dominates against them, that's going to be looking pretty bad for the GM.
Yep. I guess McCoy is looking at this and feeling like, of course you realize this means war.
Well, like I said, yeah, that's like with the players that we've moved on from, at least we don't have that part of it to deal with. I mean, we have to deal with it with Adam Gase. If Adam Gase ends up being really successful with the Jets and they pound us over and over and over with Gase, I mean, that's going to look bad for Ross. But at the same time, I'm glad we don't have to play the Titans twice this year. I mean, it would be pretty rough for Greer if Tannehill somehow ends up playing for the Titans and we're playing against Wake and Tannehill and they light us up.
Well, that's something we'd have to take a risk on. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into the OTA talk. The last time we heard from Coach Brian Flores was back on Wednesday of last week, May 29th. And he said some interesting stuff. I know the Dolphins signed Adolphus Washington, a defensive tackle, and they cut linebacker James Burgess to make a space for him. Washington is a young guy. He's somebody who I guess it's one of those potential picks, and I guess he's trying to be turned into, again, I'm going to say it, and I'm going to let people mad at me for it, but it's a very Patriot thing to do, to take other teams' young cast-offs and saying, you know what, we can do something with this guy. So Adolphus Washington is another one of those guys. He's only 24 years old. He's a young guy, and I guess they're going to see what they can do with him. They like, apparently, this is according to Brian Flores, who says that he's got versatility, has some pass rush ability, some good things in the run game, and he has some production, so I guess they like him in that regard. Another player that they added, they've been adding a whole bunch of good names, I guess, people that were considered not so high profile, but definitely high talent. Let's add Preston Williams to that list, somebody who, by the way, we're never going to get a chance to talk to for various reasons, but Preston Williams is a very high talent. He's excellent. He tiptoes lines. We heard reports that he was catching passes in the end zone, tiptoeing catches, making touchdowns from Rosen and Fitzpatrick, doing all this amazing stuff. And ironically enough, we heard the same thing about Devontae Parker in that same OTAs, except now we're hearing it about Preston Williams. I almost said Preston Wilson. I remember him from the Marlins. I think that's where that's coming from. But so Preston Williams is doing the same thing, and Williams is, I think he's definitely taller than Devontae Parker. I'm not sure if he's faster than Parker, but that little bit of speed for that extra jumping height is worth it. And plus, we don't actually have to pay him that much. Parker did come back cheap, but at the same time, I've kind of reached the point where I'm tired of Devontae Parker. I don't want to hear Devontae Parker's name anymore. I don't want him on the team. If Preston Williams can keep his nose clean, and let me also address this because I had some people asking me about it earlier this week, or I should say last week, is that the question of what is it that Preston Williams did that is so horrible? Because as we talk about him like he's done offense after offense after offense. Just to clarify, no, Preston Williams has not done 3,000 things wrong. This is not one of those Richie Incognito situations where he's done this and then he comes back and then he gets in trouble again and then he gets in trouble again and then he gets in trouble again. No, he did one thing. It was a domestic violence thing, which again is super bad and he should have been punished for it. But other than that, it's not like he really did anything wrong. The only other grievance that I can find that goes against him is that when he went to visit Auburn, instead of actually visiting Auburn, he was actively trying to recruit people away from Auburn, if I understand it correctly. So, I mean, that's kind of sleazy, but it's not really bad. Like, as far as, that's certainly not in the same vein as domestic violence, but other than that, there's not really anything that we can point at to say Preston Williams is a horrible person and should not get a second chance to redeem himself. So, no, it's not like he's a multiple offender, but nevertheless, the fact that it came up in discussions and it dropped him out of the draft entirely, we also cannot just completely dismiss what he did. So, I feel like we need to say that.
Oh, no, I agree with you, Lewis. And that it's very Patriots. They're known for bringing in people that have had, problems, and they always seem to not have problems on the Patriots. So, you know what I mean? Then when they're not on the Patriots, and they're off having trouble again for other teams.
There was one player that I can remember that really was a bust for New England. and that's ironically enough is Chad Johnson / Ocho Cinco. That was
Oh, true.
I think he was like their one bust story that I can remember. Oh, Aaron
Yeah.
Hernandez, he was the other one.
Well, yeah, but that was their own guy. Like they
Yeah.
had drafted him and stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean that you're kind of seeing a lot of the OTA stuff. It's always important, I think, to not overreact to OTA stuff because they're not wearing pads, and that's just a whole different thing. I think Devontae Parker usually looks good in OTAs throughout his career, and then he disappears when he gets more serious.
When people start hitting, yes.
I'm not an anti Devontae Parker person, but I think here's the change. They signed him to a new contract that really wasn't that pricey. He's not being paid a ton of money. But Devontae Parker is no lock to make the team. I don't know if people realize that or not, but if you're penciling in Devontae Parker as having made the team, that just is not the case right now. I think your receivers are going to obviously be Albert Wilson, Kenny Stills, and I'm pretty confident Jakeem Grant, because Jakeem Grant doesn't cost you that much, and he's a really, really big weapon in the return game. So I'm assuming those three guys are for sure the wide receivers, but interestingly, Miami, I think, wants to have a big wide receiver in that mix. And so I think the job is Devontae Parker's to lose. But, he's got Bryce Butler still. I believe he's still on the team.
Yep.
Isaiah Ford is still on the team, and Preston Williams has now been added. And Preston Williams may be more talented than all those guys, so it's going to be a very competitive spot for the wide receiver position, I think, between those guys. And I think Miami's legitimately just going to give it to whoever wins the job. I don't think any of those guys have a hand up on any of them. What was that term that used that Flores used? It was with something about cows. Like, we don't have any. What the heck was that? You know what I'm saying? I can't remember the term he used, but he was
there's nobody sacred on something like he's
no sacred cows.
Yeah.
There's no sacred cows on the team. And so he was basically meaning that in general, what that says is, I don't care if you were a first round pick. I don't care if you were a free agent acquisition.
I don't care if you're the second coming of Dan Marino. You got to compete.
You've got to compete. And so that's where Devontae Parker and Preston is. And I don't think Miami's keeping more than 5 receivers unless you're talking about practice squads. So, again, I think 3 slots are already spoken for. And so it's going to come down to who's going to be that 4th wide receiver. And I think they want that 4th wide receiver to be a bigger guy based on them grabbing Preston Williams and them having Bryce Butler still on the team with Devontae Parker and even Isaiah Ford. And so that's going to be a position to really watch in training camp and in the preseason, because I'm going to say maybe 2 of those guys are going to make the team. So if Williams does have the advantage that they can easily just put him on the practice squad, but I don't know how safe that is, because if he shows really well, looks good in the preseason and makes some big time catches, he probably would get taken off your practice squad by another team too. So you have to weigh that up and down with him. But you got to give him credit. That's a really talented player to get with no risk. If and then you're going to have him for 4 years. So Miami basically is going to have Preston Williams on a very affordable contract for the next 4 years, and he's got those 4 years to make sure he's kind of walking the straight and narrow. And if he doesn't, then you have no. You're not out a whole lot to send him on his way. So that's what you'll be looking at.
I can only imagine that the way I see it, Devontae Parker is like, I would rather see Bryce Butler over Parker at this point. I know you said you're not anti-Parker, but at this point, I am. Because I look at it this way, man. With players like Ryan Tannehill who keep coming back over and over again, you can see why he keeps hanging on, because there's just enough there that you think, okay, we can bring that out of him, we can make it work, and eventually you give up. But with Parker, it was so far in between, and even the plays he did make, it's not like they were super spectacular, so you have to question why he keeps coming back. Why is it that in spite of all of this, because it wasn't just his play, it was discipline problems, not that he was a troublemaker, but that he just didn't seem to care. You had to make him stop eating Fruit Loops for breakfast. You had to make him stop watching SpongeBob until 2 a.m. in the morning and then come to practice. These are things that football players in the NFL just don't do. Like, you look at Cameron Wake, who was the ultimate preparation guy, and then you look at Devontae Parker, and it's like they don't even look like they're both football players. One is and one isn't. So I don't understand what it is about Devontae Parker that he just keeps coming back. Why? I don't get it. He's always hurt. He doesn't play all that great when he's on the field, and he apparently has issues with actually taking care of himself. I don't understand why he keeps hanging on. If it's me, I'm looking at him and like, dude, you're behind the eight ball here. You have to you have to beat both these guys if you want to keep your job.
Oh, I think so, Lewis. Again, they didn't give him a massive deal, though,
right?
on his contract.
I get that, but but somehow I can't get it out of my head that I feel like Parker's still the front runner.
Well, here's the problem: is Parker was a high first-round pick, and so for a while they were dealing with potential of what they saw when they drafted him. But those days are gone now, and I think that's still hard for as a fan to reset, because when Devontae Parker was drafted and paid his rookie deal, he was supposed to be like our AJ Green or Julio Jones, or he was supposed to be a dominant number one wide receiver. That's what he was brought in to be. And now as fans, you just got to realize that is not what he is anymore. Devontae Parker is not being expected to come in here and lead the team in catches and yards and touchdowns. And he's nothing right now but basically a guy competing for the fourth wide receiver spot. And if you're paying him to do that and you're paying him to be our big wide receiver, he's talented. There's no doubt about it. So he's competing again. He's competed against Bryce Butler, Preston Williams, and I don't think he has any leg up on them. His first round pick, status is now done. That contract's gone. He has never performed like a number one wide receiver, and I don't think they're putting him into a position at all to expect him to be that. I don't think you'll see Devontae Parker on the field even a whole lot unless something really changes. You're probably going to see a lot more of Kenny Stills and Albert Wilson as the primary two receivers in most of the formations, and then you'll see some mixtures of the other guys. But I don't think Devontae Parker's that anymore, and you just have to understand that. And whether or not he's going to change his career around and suddenly become a number one wide receiver, I think you're really thinking probably something that's not going to happen if that's what you're thinking as a fan, that he's going to come in and be dominant in that regard.
I'm just tired of seeing his face, that's all.
Well, it's sort of like the Ryan Tannehill. It's not too differently because, a lot of people were so tired of Ryan Tannehill. And I still will tell people, Ryan Tannehill is a decent quarterback. I don't think he was ever used correctly, especially by Gase and definitely by Philbin too, because was never put under center. But it's not like Ryan Tannehill is terrible. It's just he was drafted high, and you were expecting him to be a franchise quarterback, and he's just not. And then that's something you've come to realize, is that Ryan Tannehill is not a franchise quarterback, but he's still a decent quarterback. He's absolutely a great quarterback to have as a backup. And if you bring him in to only manage a game and you don't put him in the shotgun all game long and put him under center and pound the run game a little and just have him in there to not lose the games and make some plays to win the games here and there, he can do that. He absolutely can. But again, as a fan, when they come in and what you put around him and what you're hoping he will be, when that doesn't happen, you just want him gone, because after Devontae Parker was drafted, as fans, we all thought we finally got our stud number one wide receiver, and he wasn't that. Just like when we had Ryan Tannehill, we thought, all right, we finally got our franchise quarterback. We've been waiting for so long after Marino, and that's not Ryan Tannehill, just like that's not Devontae Parker as number one wide receiver. But it's hard to let it go when they're still on the team, and that was your expectation of them, because you feel let down that's how it played out.
Yep, I'm with you on that. It's just the first round pick status. It has to go away now. It's done. So. Yep. Let's see. The other discussion that we actually briefly talked. It wasn't briefly. We talked about it for half an hour last time we did a show. But the Josh Rosen versus Ryan Fitzpatrick thing. As OTAs finishes up, because we did finally finish that up. It wasn't over when we did our last recording, but now it is. The battle between Rosen and Fitzpatrick. It seems to me still that as we start entering mandatory minicamp, that Fitzpatrick still has a leg up on Rosen. I know that you have been on the record that's saying that no matter what happens, Josh Rosen needs to be starting by the time the season starts, at the very least by week 3. But I've been saying also that Ryan Fitzpatrick, if he does win the job, he needs to win the job to set an example for the rest of the players. Is that if you win, you win. It's not like, again, there's no sacred cows on this team. But I think we have two different philosophies on how we're looking at it, and that's why we've had this disagreement. So Josh Rosen is not beating out Fitzpatrick as of yet. Are you concerned?
No, I absolutely, no matter how either one of them perform, don't expect Josh Rosen to be named the starter until the third preseason game. I think that's when he's going to get named. That's what I'm telling you. And the reason is the team wants Josh Rosen working his butt off to learn the playbook and everything he can put into it to compete with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Because Ryan Fitzpatrick's reason for being there right now is to push Josh Rosen. And again, this team is not concerned with trying to make a big playoff run or a Super Bowl run for sure in 2019. They're concerned with trying to put together a complete team that can do those sorts of things in 2020 or 2021. And so there is no more important question for this team right now than to know, is Josh Rosen going to be a franchise quarterback for us, or do we need to go after Tua or Herbert maybe in this upcoming draft? They've positioned for it. They've got all these draft picks lined up. And so you, as a team, you simply can't, you don't want to go 6-10 with Ryan Fitzpatrick or 7-9 or something and put yourself out of position to get those guys. And you absolutely have to know what you have in Rosen. But what the team wants, they want Rosen learning the playbook and accelerating up as fast as they can. Because Josh Rosen right now is behind Ryan Fitzpatrick. Ryan Fitzpatrick was here longer than Josh Rosen was, and he's had more time to work with receivers, learn playbooks, and he's been in the league a lot longer too. And Josh Rosen, one of the things that's reported about him anyway is that he's very smart and he's very capable at understanding offenses. He's very Tom Brady, Peyton Manning-like in how he approaches the game, and that it's very cerebral. That's absolutely true of Ryan Fitzpatrick too. The guy went to Harvard, so he can't be that stupid. And so they're both very smart quarterbacks. And so I have to assume Ryan Fitzpatrick has learned the playbook, and he's been all over that. And he's here to compete. Ryan Fitzpatrick is absolutely here to compete. And I hope he pushes Josh Rosen really, really hard. But unless it's really obvious, unless like Josh Rosen comes in and in the preseason he throws like 2 or 3 picks and Ryan Fitzpatrick throws 2 or 3 touchdowns, unless it's obvious to the team that clearly Fitzpatrick's way better, the team's going to want Rosen starting just because it's the best thing for them to know what to do in 2020. Because we really cannot afford to be in position to get somebody like Tua or Herbert and decide that, well, we want to give Rosen a chance. We're not quite sure what we have with him yet. That's not where we want to be, and pass on one of those guys. Because I don't know how many draft picks we're going to have in 2021. We may not have this stockpile of picks. And so we are in position if we need to trade up a little bit or what we need to do to get one of those quarterbacks. That has to be done. And I think we've disagreed too on how long Greer and Flores have. And I've been basically saying if this team is not looking like it's really trending up by 2021 season, I think they're both on the hot seat. And you can't be trending up by 2021 unless you have your quarterback in place. And that quarterback has to either be Rosen or it's got to be a guy you get drafted in 2020. If this team is trying to still get their franchise quarterback in 2021, the whole coaching staff and managerial staff is on the hot seat. Because I just don't believe Stephen Ross historically has showed too much patience when you get beyond the third season. If this team is still one of the worst teams in the league, that's not going to fly for him.
But that was that was before he had this like epiphany of his. Remember, because he had said basically that, listen, we've come to the realization that this does not work the way that I had hoped. It's not going to work like this, so we're going to try a different approach and we're going to do it this way. So for him to say that and then just flip flop right back to being the Ross that we know, that's basically Ross saying, listen, you're allowed to lose for one season, but then I want to go back to making playoff runs, and that's not realistic. That's almost like that's basically the same time frame that Adam Gase got, which is that, okay, you can kind of fail for a little while, but now you have to actually manage to win. So it's a different philosophy verbally, but you're basically saying that no, he didn't actually change his mind on any of that. He still wants to win the playoffs very quickly.
No, I want to clarify. I'm saying see the team trending up, and so I'm not putting it on this team maybe making the playoffs in 2020.
Well, how
But
up is up then? Yeah.
to me, is if we get into 2021 and we have basically not focused 2019 on trying to get the most competitive possible team and trying to win right now. And so we've given the current coaches and GMs, they've been given the freedom to draft who they want. They're going to have all these picks in 2021, all this cap space as the luxury of not making the priority to win in 2019. If we get to 2021 and we've passed into that season and we don't have our franchise quarterback, I mean, anybody that's talking about drafting a quarterback in 2021, they're off their rocker. You have no idea if Trevor Lawrence he's a freshman right now. Who knows what's going to be available in the 2021 draft and what the quarterback situation is going to look like. And so if we get into 2021, there isn't really a great looking quarterback prospect in that draft even. And we've went through 2 straight losing seasons into 2020, and our team just doesn't look that good going into 2021. And we're still trying to figure out who's our franchise quarterback going to be, or essentially we're in the same exact place we are right now. I think those guys become on the hot seat because basically they did what Ross gave them. He's not putting any pressure on them in 2019, but you've got to be looking like you have a really good team coming together in 2021. And so that's, I guess, what I'm saying. I don't have a record standard on it, but we should be a very young, talented, competitive football team by 2021 with multiple Pro Bowl players on our team. If we're where we're at now, I don't understand what we're doing then.
All right, I understand. All right, so there's not much else to really focus on. I mean, there's the fact that Flores made it clear that he loves fullbacks, which is nice, and that's kind of why they drafted one in the first place. So that works for me. And then there's, of course, the decision about what they're gonna do with like the defense as far as defensive tackles, defensive ends. Are we gonna run this? Are we gonna run that? And everybody's gonna be moving around all over the place in the trenches as well. Devon Godshaw is playing nose tackle now. They're moving people all over the place, so it's gonna be interesting to see. As now on Tuesday, which we're recording this on Monday, mandatory minicamp is going to start up. So my question to you now is, what exactly is it that you're going to be looking for as everybody comes into the building?
For minicamp, you definitely want to pay attention to the depth charts. I think who's moving up and where on the depth charts, who's getting the first team reps, are they mixing people in, that sort of thing. You're definitely going to want to keep an eye on Rosen because if he's really struggling, that can maybe change the dynamic of what this team wants to do a little bit. So I'm watching Rosen. I'm watching what they do with formations. I am 100% believing they're not going to do a ton of shotgun. I think it's definitely in the best interest of having a young quarterback like Rosen that you want him under center a lot more with, come in with an I formation with the fullback in there and power running the football. And I'm curious to see how they move Kenyon Drake around. Like, are you going to maybe get Kenyon Drake more involved in the passing game, that sort of stuff. Defensively, I've been saying this, and I still believe this strongly. I think Miami are going to play a whole bunch of D-backs, and they're going to play 3 defensive tackles. I think that's going to be a lot of the defense they run. I think it's going to be Wilkins, Godshaw, and Taylor in there, all 3 of them playing on the defensive line. And then I think you're going to see extra defensive backs, and they're going to attempt to try to be able to stop the run with those 3D tackles up front and be able to give a whole wide array of looks with all those different defensive backs. And so I think you're going to want to watch how the linebackers are used. Are we running a lot of like Kiko and McMillan? Or are those guys more going to be 2-down linemen coming in and out? And then we'll suddenly see like 6, 7 defensive backs on the field with 3D tackles. So I think you're going to see a lot of variety, and I kind of want to see them do that. And obviously, they're not going to show plays in the preseason game, but I think you are going to see them come out and run some base offense in double tight formations. You're going to see some base offense in I formations, as well as seeing them split, 3 and 4 wide receivers out. You're going to see a lot bigger mix than Miami has done probably over the last 6-7 years.
All right, so I guess but you're saying base offense. As I think about the New England Patriots offense, which again, this is their pedigree, folks. This is Chad O'Shea. He's a Patriot. Brian Flores is a Patriot. All these guys, they're all New England guys. So I see what you're saying, but like this is the difference between Adam Gase and Brian Flores that I see. Adam Gase was heralded for his playmaking ability and his ability to call and design these fantastic plays that come out of nowhere and look like they belong in like some kind of football parody where the coach just draws X's and O's all over the blackboard. But when you think about how New England does things, nothing that they do really seems all that tricky. It really just looks like a base offense, but with a machine that's so well oiled that there's nothing you can do about it. It's like trying to stop a train with your bare hands. It's not going to work.
No, what New England does so effectively is they completely change their game plans drastically, offensively and defensively, in a given week to week. So if you're trying to watch film on what New England did last week, the chance of them running that same defense and those same offenses are a lot less, I think, compared to other teams. And New England loves to, on defense, they love to take away your best player, which is why Xavier Howard just got paid a pile of money, is because Miami and Flores are going to intend on just putting Xavier Howard man-to-man on whoever the best receiver on the other teams is. And so if you want to throw to your number one wide receiver, you've got to throw to Xavier Howard all game. They want to do that. And then if you're a team that really has some injuries up front at linebacker or D-line, I think you're going to see Miami want to come in and really power run the football at you. You know, they're going to make you stop power running first. And then if you can't do that with your base package, then you have to start cheating up and whatever adjustments you have to make to help stop the run. That's exactly what Miami's wanting. And then they'll start doing things out of those formations to attack you, putting your defense out of position. Similarly, if you have some slow D-backs or you're struggling with injuries in the defensive backfield, you're struggling shutting down the pass, they'll very quickly just switch out to go 3 and 4 wide. And a lot of teams can't do that because I think their coaches are so lost in the idea that it's their scheme and it's their plays are what are effective. And what Miami has been saying, and which I've been pounding the table for years, is to be effective at coaching, you have got to understand the talent you have on your team and how to best utilize that. What schemes, what formations are the best for the players you have to help them be effective. And it's completely backwards for a lot of teams now that they are bringing players in that fit their scheme, and they're trying to put players into their schemes that work. And Miami has been doing this for years, where Charles Harris he's probably the best suited to be a outside strong side linebacker. But no, he's being asked to be a 4-3 defensive end with his hand in the dirt. Kenyon Drake obviously is not going to be a great pass defender in shotgun. He's asked to do that all game, rather than just maybe just line up with the quarterback under center and put a fullback in front of him and hand the ball off to Kenyon Drake and power run the football with him. That is the reason that Miami has failed in past years, because we have basically trying to fit square pegs into round holes with those coaches because they are obsessed with wanting to run their scheme and their plays. And so I really feel like what Flores is just trying to do is get a more diverse personnel in there so he can best utilize players. And we don't even know what those are going to be. I don't know that he knows that. It might turn out that he feels like Kenyon Drake works really well in this package, and this is how the best utilize his skills. And he might decide, this is how I want to use Kalen Ballage. Kalen Ballage is much better if I'm running him and power run only, and I switch him out for Drake when we go to this formation. That's what your coaches should be doing. Is number one is developing players. They got to feel confident that they can bring in young players and take guys that are young and turn them into solid NFL professional players. That's the developmental part. And the other part is how do we best formulate our schemes and playbooks to attack the weakness of the opponent and utilize the strengths on our team, and stop, trying to pass on 3rd and 1. And, I have all these nightmare memories of like Philbin going into Buffalo and in a game we need to win in the playoffs, and it's super windy and it's rainy and it's awful conditions, and he just runs 3 wide all game and keeps trying to throw the football. And because he's so obsessed that it's the system that wins, and you have to understand what's going on and how to adjust to that and how to use your personnel. So whether or not the New England way is really can be replicated, I don't know, because who knows what we have with Josh Rosen, and they have the luxury of having Tom Brady. And so it's easy to take a quarterback who's been in the league for, practically 20 years and change formations all the time because he knows that offense so well, and he knows the personnel so well. So you can do a lot more things when you have Tom Brady, and that's exactly what Adam Gase was getting the luxury of having Peyton Manning. And those guys have been in the league so long, you can dump a whole variety of plays that they can execute on their plate. And I don't know what we're going to be able to execute or not execute in Miami, but I do know that it's not going to be based on scheme. It's going to be based on players' individual talents.
That's refreshing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know, man. It feels like that with the off season now, there's not really much else to say. What we need, folks, what we've been trying to do now, I'm sure that y'all remember Ron Caniff of. Let's see. I feel like Ron's been part of every podcast under the sun these days. But let's see. Unsquish the Fish. We've been trying to get everybody together to be in one room, and we're doing this show because I know you guys want it. I've received messages saying, when's the next show? Well, here you go. Here's the next show. But what we really want to do is we want to get everybody together to actually have a good talk. So we're trying to get all the schedules worked up. So even after this show, who knows? We may have another show later this week. So I think that's all for now. So unless there's some parting thoughts, Chad, is there anything else on your mind you want to go ahead and say?
No, I think that's it. I think let's get into training camp, and I'm excited to see everything, all the new players and the new schemes and all of it.
I'm looking forward to it too. Oh, I should say this. For anybody who wants to try and do reporting when you're at training camp, and this applies to me as well, be prepared, because something tells me they are going to be even more tight-lipped than usual. So be very careful about using your cell phone while at training camp, because they might think that you're a spy for the New England Patriots, and they will come and kick your can. Props to security. They do their jobs very well. Sometimes a little too well.
Yeah. You're not going to get anything at press conferences either.
No, so. It's going to be very tight-lipped. They're not going to get much of anything. This is what happens when you could become New England Southeast. But anyway, so that's going to be it for us for now. Maybe we'll do another show later this week if we can get the schedules lined up. But if not, then we'll definitely have something for you next week for sure. So anyway, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you all next time for another episode of the PhinManiacs.com podcast. Good night.